West Virginia, 1,953. In the bone-chilling cold, a mother could feed a family of 6 with exactly 11 cents. A bit of leftover bacon grease, a few slices of stale bread, and a slow-stirred pot of cornmeal mush. While today we spend $14 on a box of cereal full of sugar, a painful question arises. Why were the poorest breakfasts actually the most nutritious and skillful? This isn't just about food. This is a story of stolen skills and a culture erased. Let's rediscover 24 breakfasts that have vanished from America right now. In the post-Depression years, when the ghost of scarcity still haunted the valleys of Appalachia and the working-class neighborhoods of Chicago, breakfast was not a time for enjoyment. It was a time to refuel. Mothers of that era didn't have choices, they only had resourcefulness. And sometimes, that resourcefulness was the pinnacle of a folk wisdom that we have accidentally thrown away. 24. Bread and bacon grease. Before butter became cheap and before margarine took over the market with flashy advertisements, bacon grease was the jam of the American working class. In 1952, a loaf of bread cost about 14 cents. And the grease? It was completely free, a byproduct of that rare Sunday bacon breakfast. Children would grab a quick slice at the kitchen counter, books tucked under their other arm for school. It had a smoky, salty taste and a deep richness that no bland margarine of later years could ever replace. By the 1970s, nutritionists began to condemn animal fats, and the coffee cans used to store grease slowly vanished from the stovetop. Yet, recent studies show that bacon fat actually contains less saturated fat than butter. We threw away both flavor and tradition based on the half-truths of the science of that era. 23. Cornmeal mush. In Appalachia, breakfast often began with a pot of cornmeal mush. A 5-pound bag of cornmeal, costing 20 cents, could feed an entire family for 2 weeks. Served hot with a drizzle of molasses or a splash of buttermilk, this was the only fuel that kept coal miners on their feet until noon. Children would scrape their bowls clean, while fathers ate in silence, savoring the last bit of warmth before stepping out into the chill of the mines. The real magic happened when the leftover mush was poured into a mold to set overnight, then sliced and fried crisp in lard on Saturday morning. That was the reward. Today, cornmeal mush has been erased by sugary packets of instant oatmeal. We replaced a 1-cent breakfast with something 100 times more expensive that offers only half the nutritional value. 22. Milk toast. When there was illness in the house, when the wallet was bone dry, or when the pantry held nothing but stale bread ends, mothers would make milk toast. In the 50s, milk was delivered to the door for 20 cents a quart. Stale bread, once toasted, was softened with hot milk to create a warm porridge easy to swallow and incredibly cheap. Simplicity was the point. No skill required, no special ingredients, just warmth and a full stomach. By the 70s, milk toast vanished, making way for canned soups. But anyone who grew up with this dish will tell you, nothing compares to the gentle comfort of a bowl of milk toast on a lonely winter morning. It was the symbol of caring for one another during the hardest of times. Einend winter. Egg in a hole. This is the most classic magic trick of the 1950s. Mothers made this for a very simple psychological reason. Children who normally hated eggs or were bored of bread would suddenly clear their plates when the two appeared together in a novel form. At just 3 cents for an egg and a slice of bread, a mother created a premium breakfast in the eyes of her children. Even the circle of bread cut from the center was never thrown away. It was toasted golden, brown alongside the rest to serve as a dipper for the runny yolk. This dish had dozens of different names depending on the region, from toad in a hole to one-eyed Jack. It disappeared when frozen waffles promised convenience, but in the process, we lost the playfulness and the cleverness used to coax picky eaters to the table. 20. Leftover potato cakes. In a 1955 kitchen, Throwing away leftover potatoes was unthinkable. Mothers were practicing recycling decades before the world ever knew the term. Potatoes cost only about 4 cents a pound. By pan-frying them in bacon grease, a mother transformed last night's side dish into this morning's protagonist. Children would scramble for the cakes with the crispiest edges where the starch and lard had crystallized into an irresistibly rich flavor. This was the art of energy optimization. A breakfast that cost nearly nothing, yet provided enough starch and fat to sustain alertness. Today, we call it sustainability, but to them, it was simply a deep respect for every seed of the earth. 19. Fried bread dough. On bread baking days during the week, children would often gather around the stove, waiting for this reward. Fried bread dough cost nothing extra since the dough was already prepared. The sensation of biting into the crispy crust, with the steam escaping from inside to mingle with the sweetness of the sugar, created a moment of pure happiness. This dish taught children their first lesson about patience and reward. To earn this treat, they had to help their mother knead dough all morning long. When store-bought sliced bread replaced home baking in the late 50s, this gift quietly vanished, leaving a void in the memory of the rich scent of fresh yeast every morning. 18. Fried egg sandwich. Don't confuse this with the fancy sandwiches on Instagram today, topped with avocado and sriracha. The 1950s version consisted only of eggs, bread, salt, and pepper. It was the breakfast of factory workers eating hurriedly on the bus and of children eating while grabbing their school bags. Costing less than a dime, this sandwich was perfect because the bread would soak up every drop of the runny yolk and the savory flavor of the bacon grease left in the pan. We have elevated this dish into an $8 gourmet item at fancy brunch spots, but in 1955 it was a symbol of humility. It didn't need to show off, because its simplicity and warmth were, in themselves, a testament to quality. In the 1950s, America had not yet been flattened by fast food chains. The breakfast of a coal miner in Appalachia was entirely different from that of a farmer of Nordic descent in Minnesota. These dishes were the threads that linked them to the land and their ancestors. When we lose these foods, we don't just lose a recipe, we lose a part of the definition of who we are. 17. Grits and red-eye gravy. In the South, this was the dish of wakefulness. Red-eye gravy is a strange combination: black coffee and ham drippings. The name comes from the circle of red fat that forms in the center of the gravy bowl as it settles. Pour this bitter, salty, and rich sauce over a bowl of snowy white grits, and you have a breakfast that carries the soul of rural Carolina or Georgia. A pound of grits cost just 10 cents and could last a whole week. The gravy was nearly free, made from drippings and leftover coffee. It was a symbol of a lifestyle tied to the land. As Southerners left the farms for city offices, red-eye gravy was left behind. Fast food chains have replaced the complexity of that bitter coffee flavor with greasy industrial biscuits. 16. Hoe cakes. Hoe cakes carry a history that is both painful and heroic. The name originates from the era of enslaved black people who used their farming hoes to bake these cakes directly over an open fire in the fields. By the 1950s, it had become a daily breakfast for poor black families in the South. A single bag of cornmeal could provide cakes for an entire month. Served with a bit of molasses, hoe cakes were more than just fuel. They were a symbol of resilience, a way of preserving identity in the harshest of circumstances. As the civil rights movement erupted and the Great Migration drew Southerners to the North, this tradition was fractured. Children in Chicago or Detroit began eating sliced toast and forgot the flavor of the pan-seared corn cakes that had once sustained their forefathers. 15. Scrapple. For the Pennsylvania Dutch community, scrapple was more than just a dish. It was a philosophy. Eat everything but the oink. Every scrap of the pig was utilized, cooked with cornmeal and spices to form a pressed meat block. In 1955, scrapple was sold at local butcher shops for just a few cents cheaper than bacon but twice as filling. The smell of frying scrapple on a Saturday morning was the scent of abundance and community. Scrapple could not survive the supermarket revolution due to its short shelf life and highly specific regional identity. As independent butcher shops closed down, these recipes that defied mass production vanished as well, replaced by pre-packaged lunch meats that taste exactly the same from New York to California. 14. Coffee soup. This might seem strange to us today, but for the Scandinavian American communities in Minnesota or Wisconsin, it was a dawn ritual. Coffee soup was essentially a type of warm bread pudding made in 2 minutes. It brought instant warmth to farmers who had to head into the fields in sub-zero temperatures. It made use of the last scraps of bread and provided enough caffeine to get the adults working, along with the calories to get the children running to school. The disappearance of coffee soup coincided with the rise of pre-packaged donuts and pastries. We traded the soul-warming comfort of this dish for the neat, aesthetic appeal of industrial baked goods, losing a meal that could thaw both the body and the spirit from the inside out. 13. Johnny Cakes. Johnny Cakes are a bridge between the present and America's ancient past. The recipe remained virtually unchanged for 300 years, dating back to the time of the indigenous tribes. In 1953, a plate of Johnny Cakes for the whole family cost less than 5 cents. Children would hold the cakes in their hands, blowing on the crispy, piping hot edges as they ate. The irony lies in the fact that we replaced a dish with 300 years of history with boxes of pancake mix full of chemicals just because of a pretty picture on the package. We have called this replacing the real with the fake progress. 12. Fried mush and eggs. This was the signature breakfast of Midwest farms. The combination of the crispiness from the fried cornmeal mush and the richness of the egg yolk created a texture that no cereal or toast could ever replicate. This breakfast was a testament to food optimization. Monday's cornmeal mush became Tuesday's fried cakes. Today, we eat soggy cereal or bone-dry toast, having completely forgotten the crispy on the outside, melting on the inside sensation of an authentic 6 a.m. farmhouse breakfast. The people of the past didn't have laboratories, and they didn't know how to read nutrition labels on the back of a box, but they had thousands of years of experience distilled into instinct. The very foods that modern society once dismissed as unsanitary or cheap were actually potent biological medicine. We traded our natural health for industrial safety, and the price we paid was the depletion of our gut microbiomes. 11. Clabber and cornbread. Clabber is a dish that would make most modern people cringe. It is raw, unpasteurized milk left to thicken naturally through the lactic acid bacteria in the air. Before the advent of refrigeration, clabber was the only way to preserve milk. Food scientists today confirm that clabber contains a massive amount of probiotics, equivalent to the most expensive Greek yogurts on the market. It was the shield for the digestive systems of poor Southern children in the past. As pasteurization and refrigeration became common in the 1950s, clabber vanished. We solved the problem of harmful bacteria, but at the same time, we wiped out an entire army of natural probiotics. We threw away this free food only to spend billions of dollars today on probiotic supplements. 10. Pot liquor and biscuits. And here it is, the king of this list. Pot liquor, or pot liquor, the liquid left behind after simmering greens for hours. In any modern kitchen, this liquid would be poured straight down the sink, but in 1953, it was liquid gold. All the vitamin C, iron, calcium, and potassium from the greens had leached into this broth. Nutritionists at Tuskegee University proved as early as the 1930s that pot liquor was what saved millions of children in Appalachia from anemia and malnutrition. It was a liquid multivitamin. We throw it away because we think it looks ugly or smells old-fashioned, only to spend money on dry iron supplements in plastic bottles. This is the clearest proof that we have lost the knowledge of how food actually functions within our bodies. 9. Fried cornmeal and molasses. Blackstrap molasses was the cheapest sweetener in the 1950s, often dismissed as a byproduct of the sugar refining process. But when paired with fried cornmeal, it created a high-energy breakfast designed for the extreme physical demands of blacksmiths and railroad workers. Unlike refined sugar, molasses is a mineral mine. It contains more iron and calcium than beef or milk. It served as a vital mineral supplement for families who couldn't afford fresh fruit or vegetables regularly. Today, we have replaced molasses with high-fructose corn syrup, something that provides only empty calories and diabetes. Once again, convenience has deceived us about what we call quality of life. Osem. Tomato gravy. During the freezing winter days in the Ozarks, when fresh vegetables were nothing but a dream, tomato gravy was a lifesaver. Canned tomatoes were the most resilient source of vitamin C and lycopene. The combination of the acid in the tomatoes and the fat from the bacon grease allowed the body to absorb antioxidants many times more effectively. Culinary historians at the University of Mississippi call this one of the most important dishes in American food history. It sustained entire communities through hunger. Yet, when families migrated to the cities for office jobs, they abandoned tomato gravy, deeming it too rural. They replaced it with toast spread with chemical-laden fruit jams, unwittingly cutting off their own supply of natural vitamins every morning. In the 1950s and 60s, food giants like Kellogg's and General Mills recognized a common enemy: your grandmother's cast-iron skillet. As long as mothers stood over the stove stirring gravy or shaping biscuits, those cereal boxes sat lonely on the shelves. To change that, they didn't just attack the taste buds, they attacked the self-esteem of American women. 7. Flour, gravy, and biscuits. This is the dish that the USDA once encouraged during the Korean War era because it was cheap, filling, and could be made from ingredients stored in the pantry for months. An entire breakfast for 6 people cost less than a dime. However, marketing campaigns from cereal companies targeted this dish directly. They sent a ruthless message. Modern mothers serve cereal. Only outdated mothers stand over the stove. They branded the act of making gravy as a symbol of poverty and hardship. As a result, within just one generation, this foundational dish of the South was pushed off the daily dining table to become a mere treat for the weekend. We believed we were liberating ourselves from the kitchen, without realizing we were imprisoning ourselves in cardboard boxes filled with artificial cereal. 6. Creamed chipped beef. This dish followed soldiers home from the battlefield and became a familiar breakfast every Tuesday morning. It was a symbol of discipline and efficiency. A 30-cent jar of dried beef could feed an entire family. By the 80s, this dish disappeared from most supermarket shelves. Why? Because the food industry found a way to sell you pre-made sandwich meats at 5 times the price. We abandoned a dish that once sustained the men who lived through the most brutal war in history, only to settle for pre-packaged breakfast wrapped in plastic, nothing more than bland imitations filled with chemical preservatives. 5. Buttermilk, biscuits, and sorghum. Making a proper biscuit from flour, lard, and buttermilk is a master skill. It requires the hands to sense both moisture and temperature. When Pillsbury introduced refrigerated dough in tubes during the 60s, this skill began to die out. Advertisements convinced women that the pop of twisting open the plastic tube was the sound of freedom. We traded a mastery passed down through 200 years for a tube of dough filled with emulsifiers. We lost the pride of watching biscuits rise in the oven, replacing it with a total dependence on industrial products that taste exactly the same in every kitchen. 4. Rice and milk. Before the invention of boxed Rice Krispies, this was America's original cold cereal. It made use of what was already on hand, requiring not a single extra cent of energy to re-prepare. Food corporations executed a stroke of genius. They reprocessed the rice grain, puffed it up, packed it into colorful boxes, and called it innovation. We accepted buying back exactly what we already had in our pots at many times the price, simply because they attached catchy names and cartoon mascots to it. A breakfast that was once a symbol of ultimate thrift was transformed into a money-printing machine for corporations. The disappearance of these breakfasts leaves behind an unfillable void. It is not just that we stopped eating certain dishes, from the local butcher and the skill of handmade baking to the habit of zero waste. We have become strangers, mere consumers, in the very kitchens of our ancestors. 3. Bread pudding. In 1955, the concept of throwing away bread was foreign. Bread pudding for breakfast was the pinnacle of resourcefulness. Today, we live in a throwaway culture. If bread is no longer soft, we toss it in the trash and buy a new loaf. Turning stale bread into a delicious meal requires two things that modern humans lack: time and skill. The disappearance of bread pudding marks the moment we stopped valuing food as a precious life source and began viewing it as an easily replaceable commodity. When we stopped repurposing, we also stopped thinking about sustainability. Our list would not be complete without its most somber notes, the dishes whose very existence stands as an affirmation of the indomitable human will. 2. Oatmeal with lard. Before brown sugar and maple syrup became the standard, oatmeal was a savory dish. Families who couldn't afford sweeteners used lard and salt. The fat transformed a cheap bowl of oats into something rich, turning it into the fuel that helped a man endure a 1-2 hour shift. We have forgotten this savory version, only for modern nutritionists to now advise us to add healthy fats to our breakfast for sustained energy. Our ancestors were already doing that 70 years ago with a tub of lard. 1. Water gravy. This is the poorest dish on this list, but perhaps the most important. When there was no milk for sawmill gravy and no meat for red-eye gravy, there was water gravy. Mothers performed a true kind of alchemy, turning flour, fat, water, and sheer will into something a child could eat without crying. It lives on in the memories of those who were poor enough to need it and proud enough to remember it as a lesson in survival. I tried cooking water gravy again on a Tuesday morning. At first, I feared it would taste like desperation. But it didn't. It tasted like honesty. What we call outdated is actually returning under trendier, more expensive names. We call it healthy fats, Grandma called it bacon grease. We call it probiotics, Grandma called it clabber milk. We call it sustainability, Grandma called it don't throw away a single crumb of bread. We have spent 70 years and billions of advertising dollars going in one giant circle, only to realize that those who had the least were the wisest about how to nourish a family. When we look at the figure of 11 cents, we see poverty, but if you look deeper, you see something that today's wealth cannot buy: mastery. The mothers of the past didn't need machines. They had instinct. They didn't have supplements. They had folk wisdom. The disappearance of these breakfasts is not just a change in eating habits, it is the collapse of a self-sustaining educational system within the family. We have traded speed for shallowness. We have traded glossy plastic boxes for the abandonment of the skill to turn nothing into everything. When you no longer know how to make a pot of gravy from plain water and leftover grease, you have unwittingly handed over your independence to an alien production line. If tomorrow the economy collapsed, the supply chain broke, and you had to feed your entire family with just 11 cents, what would you do? Would you have enough skill to turn scraps into strength as your grandmother once did? These dishes are not just memories, they are a manifesto of freedom. They prove that human dignity does not lie in the amount of money you spend at the supermarket, but in the wisdom of your hands and the love you pour into every breakfast. Do not let these fires go out completely. This week, try cooking one dish from this list. Don't cook it because it's cheap. Cook it to relearn how to treasure food. Cook it to connect with those who came before you. Tell me in the comments, which breakfast from your childhood do you remember most? Did your family keep a jar of bacon grease by the stove? And if you cherish these fragments of culinary history, please subscribe. Together, we will rediscover the values that have been forgotten, one cast iron pot at a time. Thank you for coming home with Nostalgia Cookery. Wishing you a warm morning filled with pride.